Hi, this is Grandma Lorie, and today the story of young Jacob and two brides from Genesis 42. What if you went to your own wedding to marry the girl you had loved for years? In ancient days, she would be wearing a veil at the wedding so you could see only a shadow of her face. Then, what if after you said, "I do," and the priest said, "I now pronounce you man and wife," you found out that somebody had switched your bride and you were married to the wrong girl and there was no way out? None. Could that really happen? Let's just see. Remember in the story of Jacob and Esau, Jacob bought the birthright blessing from his hungry big brother Esau for a bowl of red lentil stew. Later, Esau said he would kill Jacob for stealing his birthright blessing. So Jacob had to get out of town pretty fast. Before he left, he promised his mother and his father that he would go to his uncle Laban, who lived hundreds of miles away in a place called Haran. He also promised his parents he would only take a wife in that city if she believed in the one true God. One night on his journey, Jacob found a safe place to sleep and used a rock as his pillow. He had a very strange dream. A huge ladder reached down from heaven to earth, with angels going up and down it. At the top was the Lord, shining brighter than the sun, which was frightening to someone who had never expected to see God at all. The Lord spoke, "Jacob, you may have all the blessings promised to your father if you will keep my commandments. I will bring you safely home again and make sure you get to keep the promised land for your own family. Over the centuries, you will have millions and millions of great-grandchildren. I have spoken." Do you remember how important children were to these people? Having millions, even someday, was the ultimate promise. In the morning, Jacob built a pillar of stone on top of that pillow rock and anointed the pillar with oil. "I will call this place the gate of heaven, because I have seen the Lord here. I promise God that I will always worship him faithfully and always pay 1/10 of all I earn to the Lord." Paying 1/10 is called tithing. You know that. You don't pay tithing because the Lord needs the money. After all, he owns the whole earth. You pay tithing because you need to show you have willingly given it to the Lord. After that, Jacob went on his way to find his uncle Laban. This is the same Laban who was his mother's brother. It was a very long journey. When Jacob was almost there, out in a pasture, he saw a well with a huge flat stone covering the top. 3 shepherds came to the well with their flocks. Each one pushed the stone away, watered his own sheep, and pushed the stone back over the well. Jacob came up to them and asked, "Where are you men from? Do you know Laban, who is the son of Nahor?" The shepherd replied, "Yeah, we know Laban. He is a rich man in our town. In fact, look over there right now. See that girl a-comin' with her flock of sheep? That's Laban's little daughter, Rachel." Jacob was excited to see her. Even from a distance, he could see how very young, but also how very beautiful Rachel was. He said, "Will you men help her move the stone so she can water her sheep?" The men shook their heads and said, "Nah, it's only little Rachel. We'll wait until the other flocks come. Then Rachel can take her turn with the rest of them." While they spoke, Rachel arrived. She certainly was pretty. Very young, of course, maybe 10 or 11, but already prettier than any girl Jacob had ever seen. Instead of making her wait for the other shepherds, Jacob went to the well himself, pushed the stone away. He was awfully strong, and he watered Rachel's sheep for her, pouring the water into a trough. Rachel's big brown eyes grew wide. She wasn't used to strange men being kind to her. Who are you, sir? And why are you helping me? Jacob gave her a big smile. I'm your Aunt Rebecca's son, Jacob, your own cousin, and I've come all this way to meet your family. Are you really Laban's daughter? Rachel smiled too, a big smile for this big, strong man. Oh, sir, yes, I'm your cousin Rachel. I've heard all about your father, and I'm so glad to meet you. Jacob stepped forward, took Rachel's shoulders in his strong arms, and gave her a big kiss of greeting. Mwah! They greeted with a kiss in those days. He even shed a few tears. He was so happy to find someone from Uncle Laban's home after his long journey. That kiss made Rachel's heart beat faster. It made Jacob's heart beat pretty hard, too. At that very moment, the two cousins fell deeply in love with each other. Of course, they were too embarrassed to tell each other how they felt yet, but their hearts knew they would be in love forever. Rachel suddenly woke up from her trance at being kissed. Oh, I must run home and tell my father you have come. Please wait here with my sheep. I'll be back as soon as I can. And off she ran on her small, quick feet. It wasn't 20 minutes later until pretty Rachel hastened back with her father, Laban, running at her side. He hugged and kissed Jacob. I told you they kissed a lot when they met kinfolk. Welcome, welcome, my nephew. I've wondered for years what became of Rebecca and your father Isaac. For a few minutes they talked about how each of their families were doing. Then Laban said, You must come home with us right away. I've left orders for a splendid feast in your honor. Oh, Jacob, you are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. You must come and live with us for as long as you like. As they walked home with the sheep, Jacob said, I would like to live with your family for, quite some time, but I insist on helping you with your herds and flocks as payment. I've done that all my life, and my father says I'm very good with animals. As they held their feast together, Laban introduced his oldest daughter, Leah. She was quite pretty too, but she had weak eyes and kept on squinting to see things clearly. Today, she would simply get a pair of glasses and be just fine. But they didn't have anything like eyeglasses nearly 3,000 years ago. Before many months, Laban saw that Jacob had spoken the truth. He was much better with the flocks and the herds than any of Laban's servants, and even better than Laban himself. The sheep grew fat and contented, and produced more wool than ever. The cattle and goats were glossy and healthy, and gave more milk. After a month, Laban said, Just because we're related, you should not work for me for nothing. I insist on paying you. What would you like for payment? Jacob knew exactly what he wanted for payment for his services. He loved Rachel dearly and said, I will work for you for 7 years if you will give me Rachel for my wife. He knew Rachel needed to grow up a few years before she became a wife. Laban wasn't blind and could see how the two already loved each other. He slapped Jacob on the back and said, Wonderful, perfect. I would rather have her marry you than any of the other men around here. So while Rachel grew up to womanhood, Jacob loved her more than ever. Those 7 years seemed to him like only 7 days. Finally, he told Laban, I've worked the 7 years, and now I want my Rachel for my bride. So that night, everyone had a big party. In that culture, the men partied together in one room, while the women partied together in another room. The women got the bride all fixed up and beautiful with gorgeous clothes and a heavy veil over her head so her husband could barely see an outline of her face until the wedding was done. It was late and growing dark, with only the campfires and candles burning, when Laban, as the clan chief, married Jacob to his bride. Jacob took his precious wife to the bridal tent. Remember that their tents were as big as small houses, with carpets on the floor and cushions and low tables for furniture. There Jacob claimed his wife as his very own in every way. He must have been a little surprised that she didn't speak to him that night. He guessed she must be feeling awfully shy. But in the morning, Jacob found out why his little bride had not spoken. When he awoke at dawn's first light, Jacob was aghast to find not Rachel at his side, but her older sister, Leah. "What?" he cried. "You're not Rachel?" He grabbed a robe and ran right out of his tent to find Laban. "Laban, you've cheated me horribly. I worked 7 years for my Rachel, and you have married me to Leah. You are a crook and a liar, and I'm going to knock you flat." Laban's men held Jacob back while Laban explained why he had cheated Jacob. Calm down, son," said Laban. "I can explain. In our country, it is not acceptable that a younger daughter should marry before the older daughter. I had to keep the rules of my society. Jacob, just stay with Leah for 1 week, and then I will give you Rachel for your wife. Of course, you will have to work another 7 years for another wife, but I'm sure you will be glad to do it so you can marry my prettiest young daughter." Now, we know Laban didn't care as much about his daughters as he did about keeping Jacob around to make him more wealthy. Also, you must remember that having more than one wife in this culture was very common. Jacob was furious. But in those days, you couldn't just throw away your wife, especially if you were a good man. So he had to agree. The next week, he married Rachel. He loved Rachel with all his heart, but was furious with Leah for letting her father fool him. Well, the Lord had plans that nobody knew about. Plus, he had pity on poor Leah, who had been forced into this situation. Leah was miserable that her husband did not love her. So, the Lord gave Leah the biggest gift he could give any woman. He let Leah get pregnant right away. But beloved Rachel did not get pregnant. Do you remember how important children were in that culture? Having babies was the greatest wealth any man or woman could have. So when Leah had a baby, she glowed with happiness. She was sure Jacob would love her best now. And when Rachel did not have a baby, even after a few years, Rachel felt very miserable and was afraid Jacob would stop loving her. But Jacob never did stop loving Rachel the best for all his life. In time, Leah went ahead and had 3 more sons, while poor Rachel still had none. Leah's 4 sons were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. One night, Rachel got mad at Jacob and said, "Give me children or I will die." Jacob got mad right back at her and said, "Am I God to give you children or keep them away? I'm just your husband, not the Lord." Perhaps you remember that in that country, if you couldn't have children yourself, you could give your own handmaiden to your husband to be like another wife. And if your handmaiden had a baby, that baby would be counted as your own child. Well, Rachel had become desperate. She had a handmaid named Bilhah. So she said to Jacob, "Take my handmaiden Bilhah for another wife. She will deliver her baby right into my lap, so that baby will be my very own." Sure enough, Bilhah got pregnant and bore a son named Dan. Rachel was thrilled and cried with joy. God has heard my prayers. Now Dad will be my own son. A year passed, and Bilhah got pregnant again. She delivered another son right into Rachel's lap, and they named him Naphtali. When Leah saw her younger sister's success, she thought she might as well do the same thing. So she gave her own handmaiden, Zilpah, to be Jacob's fourth wife. Within a few years, Zilpah had two sons for Leah. They were named Gad and Asher. Then Leah bore two more sons of her own body, Issachar and Zebulun. Finally, Leah had a beautiful little girl and named her Dinah, one little girl among 10 big brothers. After all these many years and all these children born to her sister and the two handmaidens, the Lord had mercy on Rachel and let her have a baby from her own body. She and Jacob named this son Joseph and loved him more than all the rest of the children put together. In fact, you will hear a lot more about Joseph in the future. He was a special spirit sent by the Lord to be a ruler over a great nation and to save the lives of all his family. But all was not peaches and cream for Jacob's family. You see, Laban, Jacob's uncle and Rachel's father, was a super big cheater, which we have already seen, and he had some nasty plots in mind for Jacob. But I will tell you about those evil plots in the next story. The important thing to learn from this story is that God is in charge of everything. He knows ahead of time what kinds of things will help you and me become good, and then better, and then best. There will be times when bad things happen and you feel like God is paying no attention to you. But he always, always is. When things are tough, you may not believe how perfect God's plans are for you until later in the future. Believe me, I know. And now that I'm a grandma, I'm glad for God's plans and even for the pains he gave me through all my years, even when I got very mad or very sad and sometimes cried a lot along the way. Now I can see God's wisdom and his perfect love for me. Next week, we will learn about Laban's mean plot against Jacob and against his own daughters. So join me again later. Farewell for now.